The wide Nebraska sky stretched endlessly above the Harper family's failing farmland. Once teeming with crops and community, now it lay cracked and barren, sun-bleached and silent like a forgotten painting. Drought had stolen the land's life. Cornfields turned to dust, cattle nothing but ribs and sadness. But for 16-year-old Lila Harper, the ruined earth was merely a reflection of the life she'd been forced to endure. "Lila, get your lazy self out here and fix this damn fence." Roy Harper's voice tore through the stillness, raspy from years of cigarettes and already soaked in the morning's first whiskey. Lila set aside her tattered copy of Jane Eyre and rushed out the door. Her wiry frame moved with practiced speed, years of farm labor making her steps automatic. At 16, she had the kind of posture born not from confidence but constant bracing, for criticism, for punishment, for anything. She wore threadbare jeans and an oversized flannel shirt, her curly black hair tied back with a scrap of twine. Her eyes, dark and wide, held a quiet fire, the kind that came from surviving what most wouldn't understand. "Coming, Roy," she called, hiding any hint of bitterness. She knew better. Roy was her legal guardian, not her father. He'd married her mother, Grace, years ago, but after Grace died suddenly, something they had called a sickness with no answers, Roy had turned from rough to cruel. As Lila pulled rusted wire tight against leaning wooden posts, she heard the clinking of ice in Roy's glass behind her. He watched from the porch, mouth curled into a sneer. She didn't need to look to know what came next. "You're still doing it wrong," hissed Janine, Roy's second wife, appearing at her side with a sunburned scowl. "Useless girl. 8 years and you still can't get a fence right." Lila clenched her jaw. 8 years. That's how long it had been since her mother died and Roy had remarried. Since she'd stopped being a daughter and started being free labor. "Sorry," she muttered, adjusting the wiring again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the withered cornfields, Lila stirred a thin soup of lentils and potatoes in the cramped kitchen. From the living room she heard murmurs, Roy and Janine whispering too loudly to stay unnoticed. "We're out of time," Janine said. "The bank's gonna take everything." "You think I don't know that?" Roy growled. "Maybe. It's time to tell the Crawfords everything." "Keep your voice down," Janine snapped. "You want her to hear?" Lila froze, spoon suspended over the pot. "The Crawfords? They've been paying us to stay quiet all these years," Roy muttered, slurring now. "Maybe it's time they paid more." "And what if they just take her?" Janine asked. "What? Then? So what? One less mouth to feed." The word stabbed Lila in the gut. Take her? Who were the Crawfords? Why were they paying Roy? Her heart thudded. That night, she crawled into her attic room, the size of a closet, and opened a wooden box hidden beneath the floorboard. Inside were her mother's only remnants. A silver locket with a tiny photo of Grace, a dog-eared book of poetry, and a delicate silver ring with the initials GH. Nothing that answered the questions screaming in her mind. The next morning, the sky hung low with heat. No rain. No hope. As Lila carried feed to the barn, she caught her reflection in a shard of broken mirror. Her mother's eyes stared back, intelligent, strong, and now full of something new, resolve. Whoever the Crawfords were, they knew the truth, and somehow she would find it, even if it meant leaving everything behind. 3 days later, as she fixed the broken coop wire, a sound shattered. The morning calm, a car engine deep and powerful. She looked up. A sleek black Range Rover rolled down their dusty driveway, its shine absurdly out of place in this forgotten corner of the country. It came to a stop beside the porch, and from it stepped a tall black man in a dark suit. Everything about him radiated control and wealth. "Roy, get out here!" Janine's shrill voice echoed from inside. Lila ducked behind the grain silo and watched. The man surveyed the sagging porch, the dying fields, the collapsing barn, all with a calmness that made her stomach twist. Then he turned to the house, just as Roy stumbled out, buttoning a clean shirt over his stained tank top. "Mr. Crawford," Roy said, voice suddenly respectful, fearful. "You got my message then?" Crawford asked, voice smooth but hard. Lila's blood froze. "Crawford." "I did," he continued, eyes scanning the farm. "Though I would have appreciated a different approach." "We're desperate," Roy said. "Bills, drought. We need more help." Janine appeared in her Sunday dress. "Please, Mr. Crawford, we've got coffee ready. Come in." "Where is she?" Crawford asked, eyes narrowing. Lila's breath caught. "Working," Janine said quickly. "Always working, that girl. Lila, come here." There was no point hiding. Lila stepped out, cheeks burning with shame. She approached slowly, aware of every speck of dirt on her clothes and every tangled strand of hair. The man looked at her with a gaze so intense she almost staggered. His voice softened. "Lila." He said her name like it meant something. "You look just like—" He stopped himself, clearing his throat. "Like someone I knew." Lila stared, uncertain. "My name is Malcolm Crawford," he said, then turned to Roy and Janine. "We need to talk. All of us." Inside the dimly lit living room of the farmhouse, Lila sat rigid on the edge of the frayed couch, her pulse hammering as Malcolm Crawford settled into Roy's armchair like he owned the entire place. He didn't fidget or hesitate. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, calculated. Moments later, the door creaked open again, and in stepped a woman in her early 50s wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather folder. Her presence was cold, but professional. "I'm Ms. Denise Alvarez from Child Welfare Services," she said, nodding at Lila, then at Malcolm. "Let's get straight to it." Lila blinked in confusion. "Welfare? I'm here to offer Lila a future," Malcolm began, lacing his fingers together. "One that isn't possible here." Her stomach flipped. "They're talking about me like I'm not even here." "What kind of future?" Roy asked, but his voice had already lost its bluster. His eyes were darting toward the thick envelope Malcolm had placed on the coffee table, its seal unbroken but radiating promise. Education, safety, a permanent home, structure. Malcolm turned toward Lila. "I have connections, elite schools, personal tutors, mentorship. She deserves that." "And why are you doing this?" Janine asked sharply, voice like barbed wire. "What's in it for you?" Malcolm's jaw flexed. "Let's just say, I have personal reasons." Ms. Alvarez opened her folder and began flipping through legal documents. "Mr. Crawford's guardianship request has already been processed. His background checks are flawless, his estate approved for minor placement, and we've reviewed living conditions at this residence." Lila's vision narrowed. "Guardianship? What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means," Roy said, now with a strange softness she'd never heard before, "you'll be living somewhere else, sweetheart. You'll have a good life, a real chance." "I never asked for this," Lila replied, but even she didn't believe it. Some part of her, quiet and buried deep, wanted to run from this place. From the broken walls, the hunger, the silence. "The final decision isn't entirely yours, Lila," Ms. Alvarez added gently. "Given your age, the state has the right to intervene if your living conditions are deemed inadequate." Lila's eyes flicked across the room. The peeling wallpaper, the duct-taped chairs, the sagging floorboards. Then Malcolm reached into his jacket and slid the envelope closer to Roy. "This should cover transitional costs. And the monthly support we discussed." "Monthly support?" Lila stared at the envelope like it had teeth. "You're paying them?" Silence. "You're buying me?" "Lila, it's not like that," Ms. Alvarez said quickly. "Then what is it?" Lila snapped, rising from the couch. He just gave them money for me. What do you call that? An investment in your future, Malcolm said quietly. Roy's eyes had locked onto the envelope like a starving man spotting bread. He snatched it with ungraceful fingers, thumbing through the bills with the urgency of someone who'd been counting debts for far too long. Lila, don't be ungrateful, Janine murmured. This is your way out. You're not doing this for me, Lila shouted. You just want to get rid of me. Malcolm didn't flinch at her fury, but for the briefest moment, his gaze faltered. She saw something dark flicker there. Regret? Guilt? I won't go, she said. You can't make me. Actually, Ms. Alvarez said, lifting a document from her file, given the report we've filed on this household's finances, utilities, and overall stability, the state is prepared to place you with Mr. Crawford immediately. We'll return in the morning for final departure. Lila stumbled backward. Tomorrow? Yes, Malcolm said, standing. Pack light. Everything you need will be provided. Later that night, upstairs in her attic room, Lila clutched the silver locket her mother left behind. She stared out the cracked window at the dark fields and wondered what her mother would have said. Would she have told her to fight? Or to go? Beneath the locket, her hands trembled. She was leaving the only place she had ever known, even if it had never felt like home. And somewhere inside her, a voice whispered, anything is better than this. The Crawford estate loomed ahead, like something out of a dream, or maybe a warning. As the black SUV curved up the stone-paved driveway, Lila pressed her forehead against the cool window, trying to absorb what she was seeing. Marble columns, fountains, manicured gardens that looked like they'd never known drought or decay. Every leaf, every rosebush was sculpted to perfection. This is your new home, Malcolm said, as the vehicle came to a stop beneath an arched awning. But his voice wasn't warm. It was uncertain, as if even he didn't believe it. The double doors of the mansion swung open, revealing a woman in her 60s with a pinched mouth, gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and a black uniform so crisp it looked ironed onto her. This is Mrs. Eaton, the housekeeper, Malcolm said as he stepped out. Good afternoon, miss, Mrs. Eaton said, eyeing Lila's worn jeans and second-hand duffel bag with an arched brow. Your room is ready. Lila had barely stepped onto the stone steps before another figure appeared in the doorway, an elegant woman in her mid-40s, all sharp cheekbones and expensive taste. Her navy heels clicked with precision, and her blonde bob didn't move an inch as she surveyed Lila like a smudge on her designer glass. So this is her, she said, her tone sugar-laced poison. Lila straightened instinctively. Lila, this is Veronica, my wife, Malcolm said. His voice carried tension now. Veronica's smile was practiced. How quaint. Veronica, Malcolm warned. I'm just thinking of our reputation, she said with a tilt of her head. The Eastwood Gala is next weekend. Senator Hill will be there. What will people say when they see... She waved a manicured hand vaguely in Lila's direction. Lila's cheeks flushed. We'll discuss it later, Malcolm snapped. Mrs. Eaton, please take Lila to her room. The housekeeper led her down a hallway lined with oil paintings, each one a statement of old wealth and colder history. They passed a dining room the size of a school gym and a staircase carved from white oak before stopping at a massive wooden door. These are your quarters, Mrs. Eaton announced. Lila stepped inside and froze. The bedroom was bigger than the entire lower floor of Roy's farmhouse. A 4-poster bed, velvet curtains, a marble fireplace, a mahogany desk overlooking the garden, and a private bathroom that gleamed like a luxury spa. It was breathtaking, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like a museum, beautiful, untouched, and not meant for someone like her. Dinner is at 7 sharp, Mrs. Eaton said without emotion. Your schedule will include a private tutor, evaluations by licensed professionals, and mandatory etiquette instruction. I suggest you prepare. And then she was gone. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, her old duffel bag absurd on the pristine white carpet. She didn't unpack. She just stared at the carved molding on the ceiling and wondered, what exactly have I been brought here for? Dinner that night was a performance. Lila sat stiffly across from Malcolm and Veronica at a grand table that could seat 20. Silverware gleamed like weapons, and the salmon was served with sauces she couldn't pronounce. So, Veronica said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin, have you ever dined with multiple courses before, Lila? Lila shook her head. Ah, Veronica said, sipping her wine. Well, we'll have to fix that. Malcolm didn't speak much. He was checking his phone constantly, distracted, eyes distant. I've arranged for Dr. Langford to evaluate you tomorrow, Malcolm said suddenly as dessert was served. Evaluate me? Lila repeated. Just routine, he replied. A psychological assessment. To help us understand how best to support you. Lila nodded, but the word evaluate sat wrong in her chest. Everything in this house felt conditional, like a test she hadn't studied for, and the luxury, while stunning, was wrapped in cold, sharp strings. Later that night, Lila stood by the window of her enormous room. The garden outside was perfect, not a leaf out of place. A groundskeeper trimmed hedges with robotic precision. She stared out at the immaculate world and whispered to herself, "This isn't freedom. It's a prettier prison." She held her mother's locket close to her chest and made herself a promise. No matter how beautiful this place is, I won't forget where I came from, or why I'm really here. 2 weeks passed in a blur of expectations and surveillance. Lila's days were packed with private tutoring, etiquette lessons, piano sessions, and above all, psychological evaluations. Every question from Dr. Langford was delivered with a practiced smile and clinical tone, like he was more interested in her reactions than her answers. How often do you feel unsafe? He'd ask, jotting down notes even before she spoke. Do you find it difficult to trust people in positions of authority? Have you ever had violent thoughts toward yourself or others? Lila answered carefully, walking the tightrope between honesty and caution. She didn't trust any of them, not Langford, not Mrs. Eaton, and certainly not Veronica, who monitored her with the smug gaze of a woman guarding a delicate heirloom she didn't want but couldn't give away. Malcolm, however, was harder to read. Sometimes he was kind, quiet, almost gentle. He'd ask how her tutoring was going, if she was adjusting, if she needed anything. But those moments were brief, like he was forcing himself to act a role he'd rehearsed but never believed in. And always, she caught something in his eyes when he looked at her, guilt, deep, reluctant, and terrifyingly personal. At Whitmore Academy, Seattle's most prestigious private school, Lila quickly learned she didn't belong. Her uniform was tailored, her books brand new, and yet she walked the halls like a ghost. Students whispered about her. The country girl living with the Crawfords, the charity case, the mystery girl who came out of nowhere. In English Lit, her brilliance only made it worse. Your paper on Macbeth was extraordinary, Miss Harper, her teacher said one day, smiling thinly. Especially given your background. Lila forced a smile. Given your background. The phrase clung to her like a scarlet letter. At lunch, she sat alone in the school's marble-column cafeteria, surrounded by silverware and stairs. No one invited her to sit. No one wanted to know her story, only speculate. You know they're all dying to know who you are, right? A voice said behind her. Lila turned to see a girl with dark brown skin, a warm smile, and eyes full of understanding. I'm Elena Rivera, she said, sliding into the seat across from her. My dad's the groundskeeper at the Crawford estate. I go to community college nearby. Lila blinked. You know who I am? I know you're not what they say, Elena said, unwrapping a sandwich. My dad says Mr. Crawford has been different since you arrived. Tense, stressed. And Veronica? She's taking it out on everyone. Lila looked down at her untouched tray. Feels like this place wants to swallow me whole. Then spit back, Elena said with a wink. That evening, Leela played Chopin's Nocturne on the grand piano in the music room, her fingers moving with an instinct she couldn't explain. For a few minutes, she felt herself, her mother, had played piano. It was one of the few happy memories she could still see clearly. You've progressed quickly, her piano tutor, Professor Duval, said, his French accent clipped. Have you trained before? No, just my mom used to play, Lila murmured. Then you have her gift, he said, closing the sheet music. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained as usual. Veronica complained about the upcoming Eastwood Gala, where every major donor and politician would be in attendance. I've told everyone you'll be there, Malcolm, she said, slicing her salmon with elegance. We can't miss another event. And what about her? Lila is part of this family now, Malcolm said flatly. Veronica snorted. She's a ward, darling, not exactly the same thing. Lila felt her face flush, but she didn't speak. She was learning. Silence was her shield. That night, she walked the gardens alone, needing air. The moon cast silver light across perfectly trimmed hedges. Beyond the trees, she saw a warm glow, Elena's cottage. Through the window, she saw Elena and her father, laughing over dinner. No chandeliers, no grand piano, but love and laughter filled the space. It hit Lila like a wave. This estate had everything except warmth. It was a beautiful prison. The next morning, Malcolm left early for work, but he forgot to lock his study. Lila waited until the house was quiet. Her heart beat louder than her footsteps as she slipped inside the room filled with expensive art and leather-bound books. On his desk were files. A filing cabinet stood along the wall. She opened the second drawer. Banking, corporate, legal. But the third one was labeled personal, confidential. She opened it, and there it was. A manila folder with her name typed across the top. Lila Grace Harper. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, a birth certificate. Her mother's age at Lila's birth, 16. The father's name, Jeremiah Crawford. Her jaw dropped. Not Roy, not Malcolm. Jeremiah. She flipped to the next document. Medical records. Clippings from old newspapers. One headline read, Heir to Crawford Tech scandalized by teenage staff pregnancy. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at a photograph. A man, her father, young, smiling. She had his eyes. The next page was a will signed before his death from cancer. It clearly named her Lila Grace Harper Crawford, heir to half his estate and 25% of Crawford Tech shares. The final page was a handwritten note. Malcolm, I made mistakes. I hurt Grace. I broke her. But Lila is my daughter. She deserves truth. She deserves her legacy. Don't bury it. Tell her everything. Jeremiah Lila dropped the file, hands shaking. Her entire life had been a lie. And Malcolm? He hadn't rescued her. He'd hidden her. Lila's fingers trembled as she photographed the documents. Birth certificate, will, legal records, damning, letters, and slipped them back into the folder just as she found them. Her breath was shallow. Her thoughts raced. He knew. All this time, Malcolm knew who I was, who my father was, and he's been hiding it. She was halfway to the door when she heard footsteps. Panicked, she ducked out through the side entrance of the study, heart pounding. From behind the carved wooden panel, she heard Malcolm's voice, tense, hurried, low. No. Everything's still under control, he said into his phone. The documents are locked. She won't know a thing until she turns 18, just like Jeremiah wanted. A pause. Frank won't be a problem much longer. Lila's heart stopped. Frank. That was Roy's real name. She hadn't heard it in so long, she'd almost forgotten it. And Malcolm had just said his name like a threat. She pressed herself flat against the wall, her whole body trembling. What did he mean Frank won't be a problem much longer? Her thoughts raced back to the overheard conversation weeks ago. The money, the Crawford name, the strange fear in Roy's voice. He was afraid of Malcolm. Back in her room, Lila stared at the photos she'd taken, unable to sleep. Her birthright, her inheritance, her truth. All buried beneath lies and luxury. They didn't rescue me. They caged me, and worst of all, Malcolm was planning to keep everything hidden, possibly forever. 3 weeks later, the Crawford estate hosted its annual benefit gala. Seattle's elite swirled through the marble halls in sequins and silk, sipping champagne and pretending to care about charities they barely understood. Lila had been told to attend, briefly, for appearances. Mrs. Eaton had handed her a pale lavender gown. Veronica had ordered her hair styled in something simple to avoid embarrassment. She'd barely zipped the dress when a commotion erupted downstairs. A slurred voice rang through the house, loud, angry, and all too familiar. "Where's your precious host?" Lila froze. She rushed to the top of the staircase and looked down. Roy, Frank, stood in the center of the grand foyer, disheveled, red-faced, and swaying. His shirt was untucked, a champagne flute clutched in one hand. Malcolm appeared from a group of startled guests. "Frank," he said tightly, "you're drunk." "Drunk, but not stupid," Frank barked. "Where's my money, Crawford?" Veronica paled. Guests were already pulling out their phones. "You all think this family is something special?" Frank shouted. "You think they're heroes? Malcolm's brother got a 16-year-old girl pregnant. Then they paid me to keep quiet for 16 years!" Gasps swept through the crowd. Lila clutched the banister. "I told you I wanted more when the girl turned 16, Frank howled. "You promised!" 2 security guards moved toward him. Frank didn't back down. "Lila, that girl upstairs? She's not just some charity case. She's his niece. Her father left her everything, and Malcolm's been using it to build this damn empire." Malcolm's jaw was tight. "That's enough." "Or what? You'll kill me too?" Frank shouted. The guards grabbed him. "Wait!" Veronica cried. "He has proof! He has— Get him out!" Malcolm ordered. As Frank was dragged away, his eyes found Lila's. For a moment, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Fear, real, mortal fear. He was telling the truth, and he was terrified. Later that night, the mansion was silent again. Lila paced outside Malcolm's study, heart pounding. Raised voices leaked through the heavy door. "You ruined everything," Veronica hissed. 16 years of managing appearances and now this? "I warned him," Malcolm said, his voice cold. "You promised more money," Frank snapped. "You cheated me." Then, a struggle, a crash, a loud grunt, and then, silence. Lila pushed the door open. Frank lay crumpled on the marble, his head at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading. Malcolm stood over the body, fists clenched, face pale. Veronica turned, startled. "He fell! He was drunk!" Lila dropped to her knees. "Frank?" She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. No pulse. "You killed him," she whispered, looking up in horror. "It was an accident," Veronica insisted, hands raised. "He stumbled." "I saw you fighting," Lila shouted. Malcolm's voice was sharp. "You want a police investigation? That man just tried to blackmail us. Do you want to explain to the media why a miner from a farm now owns millions in Crawford shares?" "We have to call someone," Lila said. "He's dead." Malcolm pulled out his phone. "I'll call people who can make this go away." "You're covering it up?" Lila asked, stunned. "You won't have to lie," Malcolm said, dialing. "You'll just say nothing. And if I refuse?" Veronica stepped closer, her tone calm and icy. "Dr. Langford's evaluations say you're emotionally unstable. No one will believe you." Lila backed away from them both. She was alone. Again. Only this time, she was standing on the edge of something even darker. Sleep was no longer a place of rest. Every time Lila closed her eyes, she saw Frank's lifeless body, the way his blood crept across the marble floor like a dark secret made visible. She heard the sickening crack of his skull, heard Veronica's voice, smooth, cold, dismissing it all like spilled wine, and Malcolm's threat, that subtle poison cloaked in a suit and tie, echoed in her mind. You won't have to lie. Just say nothing, or no one will believe you. 3. Weeks had passed since that night. The official story was simple. Frank Wright left the gala drunk and distraught. No one had seen him since. But Lila knew better. At Whitmore Academy, even Elena noticed the change. You look like you haven't slept in weeks, she said one afternoon, pushing a smoothie into Lila's hands. Are you eating? Breathing? I'm managing, Lila muttered. My dad said some police came to the estate last week, asking questions. Something about that guy at the gala. Lila's stomach clenched. What did they want? Routine questions, apparently. Someone in Montana reported him missing. Lila stabbed at her salad. Montana. That's where he was last seen. That's where he probably died. That evening, Lila made an excuse to stay at the school library. But instead of homework, she spent hours researching legal emancipation, missing person cases, and inheritance fraud. Without a body, and without physical evidence, Frank's disappearance would fade into silence. But if she could prove why he'd been there, why he'd exploded like that in front of the elite, she needed help, and she needed proof. Back in her room, Lila opened her stolen photos again. Every document, every clipped article, every damning record confirmed it. She was the legal heir to Jeremiah Crawford, Malcolm's brother. The shares, the trust fund, the will, all real and all hidden from her. She remembered something Malcolm said on the phone. She can't know. Not until she's 18. She had to find out what else he was hiding and who else knew the truth. The next day brought an answer in the most unexpected form. An anonymous email. Subject, your mother. Message. Frank wasn't the only one who knew. If you want the truth, meet me at Pike Place Market. Stall 47. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come alone. A friend. Lila's first thought was a trap. Her second thought was a chance. The next afternoon, she lied to Mrs. Eaton, said she had rehearsal for drama club, and slipped out of the estate with her hood up and her heart pounding. The bus ride into downtown Seattle felt like an escape into another life. Pike Place Market buzzed with color and chaos. Crowds swirled around her, fishmongers shouted, musicians played saxophones, tourists clicked photos. She found stall 47, a small antique and jewelry booth. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, her eyes kind, her hands worn from decades of careful work. You must be Lila, she said softly. You look just like your mother. Lila froze. Who are you? My name is Nancy Thorne. I was a nurse at Seattle General. I cared for your father, Jeremiah, during his final months. Lila's lips parted. You knew him? Nancy nodded. He gave me something before he died. He asked me to give it to you when you turned 16, if his family failed to do so. She reached under the counter and pulled out a thick manila envelope, sealed and yellowed with age. Inside is everything he left behind. He wanted you to know the truth. And he wanted you to decide what to do with it. Lila opened the envelope right there, her hands trembling. Inside were medical records, DNA test results, and a handwritten letter from Jeremiah himself. Lila, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I trusted my brother to do the right thing, but if he hasn't, then you need to know the truth. I loved your mother, but I failed her. You deserve to know who you are, and you deserve every bit of the life she dreamed for you. Love, Jeremiah Crawford. Tears blurred Lila's eyes. I've been carrying this secret for years, Nancy said gently. There's more. Frank wasn't the only one who knew about Jeremiah and Grace, and you're not the only one willing to fight for the truth. For the first time in months, Lila didn't feel alone. She felt armed. Nancy Thorne's apartment overlooked the Puget Sound, modest and filled with shelves lined with nursing books, photographs, and faint smells of lavender. And old wood. The quiet contrast to Malcolm Crawford's polished estate made Lila feel, for the first time in a long while, like she could breathe. She sat on Nancy's couch, clutching the envelope of documents Jeremiah had left behind. His final words, handwritten with regret and hope. The trust fund papers, birth records, and even notarized instructions laid bare a truth far more powerful than what Malcolm had tried to hide. I've waited 5 years to tell you this, Nancy said as she set 2 mugs of tea on the table. Your father knew what he did to your mother was wrong. She was only 16. He was 28. That imbalance, it never left him. Not even when cancer started taking him. Lila swallowed. He admitted that in the letter. Nancy nodded, lowering herself into the armchair across from her. He spent his final months trying to fix it. He had DNA tests done, worked with lawyers to set up a trust that Malcolm couldn't touch. He created a separate copy of his will naming you as his legal heir, half his personal estate, and 25% of Crawford Tech. Lila blinked. And Malcolm was executor? Yes. Jeremiah wanted to believe his brother would protect you. Nancy's voice grew cold. But Malcolm used your money. Hid the will. Spent 5 years expanding the company using funds meant for your education and inheritance. Lila looked down at a corporate ledger among the documents. He's been voting with shares that legally belong to me? For years, Nancy confirmed. $47 million. Stolen in plain sight. Lila stood and began pacing. I have to go public with this. Report him. Expose everything. You will, Nancy said, but not alone. There's someone else you need to meet first. Who? Nancy walked to a metal filing cabinet and pulled out a weathered business card. She handed it to Lila. Eleanor Crawford McBride, it read, retired chairwoman, Crawford Trust Holdings. She's Jeremiah and Malcolm's aunt, the family matriarch. Jeremiah trusted her, and she knows everything. Lila stared at the name. Why hasn't she come forward? She tried. For years. But Malcolm is powerful. She was afraid she didn't have enough proof. Nancy paused. Until now? Lila looked up. She has evidence? Enough to bury Malcolm, Nancy said, fire building in her voice. She was present when Jeremiah recorded a video confession meant for you. She kept the original will, hidden in her private safe. And she's been watching you, waiting to see if Malcolm would follow through on his promises. Lila sank back down. And now she knows he didn't. Nancy nodded. She wants to meet you. Lila glanced out the window. The water shimmered under the cloudy afternoon light, and boats drifted silently toward their destinations. Let's go, she said. Nancy's hand landed gently on her shoulder. Lila, there's something else. Eleanor isn't just offering legal help. She's bringing in someone who has power. What kind of power? A federal prosecutor, Nancy said. And not just any prosecutor. Her name is Olivia Reyes. She specializes in financial abuse, exploitation, and she's Grace's niece, your mother's sister's daughter. Lila's eyes widened. My cousin? She's been investigating Malcolm for months, Nancy said. Waiting for the right moment. Your story is that moment. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She lay on her side in bed, staring out the Crawford estate window at the moonlit gardens. Somewhere, Malcolm was sleeping under the same roof, confident in his secrets. But Lila was no longer afraid, because now she had allies, proof, and a plan. Eleanor Crawford McBride's penthouse soared above Seattle, a fortress of wealth, steel, and secrets. From the 32nd floor, the view was endless. Glass towers, ferry boats, and the distant shimmer of the Sound. But Lila barely noticed the beauty. She was focused on the woman waiting for her by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Eleanor was 82, with silver hair pulled into a perfect twist, her frame slight but her presence commanding. She turned as Nancy and Lila entered, her gaze sweeping over Lila with clinical precision. "You have your mother's eyes," she said at last. "But thank God you have your father's spine." Lila blinked. "You knew them both?" "I hired your mother, Eleanor," said, motioning them to sit. "For the summer estate." She was smart, graceful, determined. And Jeremiah, my nephew, was a fool who let power corrupt his judgment. She opened a wide leather portfolio and laid it on the glass coffee table. "Proof," she said. "Years of it." Lila leaned in. Inside were photographs of Jeremiah, with her mother, legal contracts, forged signature analyses, voice recordings of Malcolm making backroom deals. There was even a handwritten copy of Jeremiah's final confession. But the most chilling file was labeled Guardianship Strategy, L. Harper. Eleanor tapped it. "Malcolm planned to control you indefinitely. He's been building a case through your evaluations, subtle notes from Dr. Langford, reports that suggest emotional instability." Lila's throat tightened. "To say I'm unfit to inherit?" Eleanor nodded. "And if you turned 18 under his care, he'd quietly move to have you declared mentally incompetent, rendering your trust legally inaccessible." Lila's stomach turned. "And no one would have believed me." He set the stage, years in advance. "He underestimated one thing," Eleanor said, voice sharp. "Me." From her drawer, she retrieved a digital recorder and pressed play. Malcolm's voice crackled through the speaker. "If she starts asking questions, we'll shift the narrative. Emotional trauma, PTSD. We have Langford's notes to support it." "You're sure she'll never find the original will?" another voice asked. "I destroyed every copy, except the one locked with Eleanor, but she's too sentimental to betray me." Eleanor shut it off. "He was wrong." Lila leaned back, processing it all. "You kept everything?" "Everything," Eleanor confirmed. "And I'm not the only one ready to act." The door opened. In walked a tall woman in a navy suit with a crisp file folder under her arm. She had almond brown skin, curly hair pulled back, and eyes as sharp as Eleanor's. "Lila," Eleanor said, "meet your cousin, Olivia Reyes, prosecutor, and your mother's niece." Lila stood. "Your family? I've waited 10 years to meet you," Olivia said, her voice firm but kind. "Grace, your mother, was my aunt. She didn't deserve what the Crawfords did to her. Neither did you." Lila sat again, breath shaky. "Why now?" Olivia opened the folder. "Because thanks to Nancy and Eleanor, we finally have everything we need to bring Malcolm down." She laid out documents, forged legal papers transferring trust shares wire transfers from Lila's fund to Crawford Tech expansion accounts. Medical evaluations with falsified notes, and the most damning, Malcolm's plan to have Lila institutionalized. If she ever resisted, Malcolm's been laundering stolen inheritance through business fronts and silencing anyone who objected, Olivia said. "But now, we go public. And we do it at the Crawford Tech Board meeting tomorrow night." Lila straightened. "You're going to confront him there?" "No," Eleanor said with a wicked glint in her eye. "You are." The next evening, Crawford Tech's boardroom sat high above the city, glass-walled, intimidating, and lit like a fortress. The long table was surrounded by investors, department heads, and executives, all dressed to the nines in tailored suits and silk ties. They were here to finalize Malcolm Crawford's expansion deal into the Asian markets, a multi-million-dollar transaction that would solidify his dominance in the industry. Malcolm stood at the head of the table, confident, smiling. He was in his element. Then the doors swung open. Lila stepped in, flanked by Eleanor Crawford McBride on her right and Prosecutor Olivia Reyes on her left. The room fell silent. The sound of her heels echoed across the polished floor like a battle drum. Malcolm's face turned to stone. What is the meaning of this? Justice, Eleanor said coldly. Something your empire has avoided long enough. I didn't authorize this. You don't need to, Olivia interrupted, placing a thick folder on the table. I'm here under federal authority. You are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. There were audible gasps around the table. Phones appeared in hands. Board members began taking notes, some already leaning away from Malcolm like he was radioactive. Veronica, seated beside him, turned pale. This is outrageous. You'll want to listen, Lila said, stepping forward, because what you're about to hear will change everything you thought you knew about this company and the man who runs it. Olivia opened the folder, sliding out photos, documents, and forged signatures. These are falsified evaluations from a licensed psychiatrist hired by Malcolm Crawford. The goal? To build a case against a minor in his care, me, so he could have her declared mentally unfit to inherit her rightful trust. She pointed to the next paper. This is Jeremiah Crawford's will, the real one, not the copy Malcolm lost. It grants me half of his personal estate and 25% ownership of this company. That's absurd, Malcolm barked. That will was never. It was sealed and witnessed by your own aunt, Olivia snapped, who, I might add, has 2 years' worth of recordings of you stating your intent to defraud and manipulate your niece. Eleanor calmly reached into her handbag and produced a digital recorder. She pressed play. Malcolm's voice filled the room. If she gets close to the truth, we'll have her declared unstable. Langford already has enough on paper. What? About the will? Another voice asked. We'll burn the original. There's no one left to stop me. Silence. Then Olivia spoke again. We also have proof that company expansion funds were drawn directly from a trust meant solely for Lila Harper Crawford. Lila turned to the room. He used my inheritance to build this company. He bought silence, buried the truth. And when someone tried to stop him, he killed them. Murmurs turned into gasps. Veronica rose slowly. He murdered that man at the gala, she said quietly, her eyes locked on Malcolm. It wasn't an accident. I have the emails. I have the recordings. I won't go down with you. Malcolm stood, knocking over his chair. You stupid. But before he could finish, the doors burst open again. FBI agents filed in, badges out, weapons holstered but visible. Malcolm Crawford, you're under arrest for financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit manslaughter, the lead agent said. Please step away from the table. Don't touch me, Malcolm shouted. But his words fell into chaos as agents cuffed his wrists, pressing him forward. You have no idea what you've done, he roared at Lila. You think you've won? I don't think, Lila said quietly. I know. He was dragged from the room, his legacy crumbling in real time. Veronica slumped back into her chair, defeated. Eleanor nodded once. Olivia gathered the documents. Lila stood motionless as the board turned toward her, not as a charity case, not as a problem, but as an owner. 1 year later, the headstone gleamed in the morning light, etched in soft gray marble, surrounded by a bed of yellow tulips. Grace Harper, beloved mother. Her truth lives on. Lila stood alone at the gravesite, one hand resting gently against the cool stone. The wind whispered through the trees, not like the silence of the Crawford estate, but with something softer, peace. I did it, Mom, she whispered. I brought it all out. The lies, the silence, all of it. Behind her, footsteps crunched in the gravel. You ready? Nancy Thorne asked, stepping up beside her. Lila nodded, wiping her eyes. "Today's the big day," Nancy added. "Your first board meeting as CEO. I'm not nervous," Lila said, though her voice shook. Nancy smiled. "That means you're ready." The downtown building, once known as Crawford Tech HQ, now bore a new sign over its glass facade. The Grace Foundation and technologies inside. Walls were lined with photographs, not of corporate milestones, but of young women saved, students mentored, victims protected, survivors empowered. The transformation was complete. At 18, Lila Harper Crawford now sat at the head of a boardroom filled not with cutthroat executives, but with educators, engineers, nonprofit leaders, and entrepreneurs. The company had been restructured under her leadership, focused not on exploitation, but on ethical innovation. Eleanor entered with a cane but with all the pride of a queen watching her heir take the throne. "Are you prepared for your speech?" she asked. Lila smiled. "I've been preparing my whole life." The conference hall filled with employees. Cameras clicked. The press waited. Olivia stood by the side wall, her arms crossed proudly. When Lila stepped on stage, silence fell like snow. She looked out over the crowd, took a deep breath, and began. "My mother was 16 when she came to the Crawford estate. She dreamed of something better, something honest. But those dreams were stolen by people with power and no conscience. For years, her voice was buried. I'm here to make sure it never happens again." She paused, her voice steady now. "This company will never again profit from silence. It will never again be used as a shield for cruelty or greed. From today on, we build technology that serves people, not the other way around. Because justice doesn't come from power, it comes from truth." Applause erupted. Loud, raw, real. Among the crowd, Elena Rivera stood clapping, now a college graduate and the director of community programs for the Grace Foundation. That evening, back at the modest home she had purchased overlooking Puget Sound, Lila and Nancy sat on the porch as the water glowed gold under the setting sun. "You did it," Nancy said softly, handing her a mug of tea. "No," Lila replied, eyes scanning the water. "We did it. You, Eleanor, Olivia, Grace. All of us. This legacy belongs to all the women who were told they didn't matter." She paused, her gaze thoughtful. "Malcolm built an empire out of fear and control. I'm going to build something better, out of truth." Nancy looked at her with tearful pride. "Your mother would be proud." "No," Lila said with a quiet smile. "She'd be relieved." As the stars began to blink over the horizon, Lila, Harper Crawford leaned back in her chair, no longer afraid of the past, and finally free to build a future she owned completely, 17 years earlier. The Crawford family's summer estate in the outskirts of Bellevue buzzed with quiet wealth. Crystal. Glasses clinking on verandas, staff in white uniforms moving like shadows, and guests who spoke in restrained tones about stocks and art auctions. Among the summer staff that year was a 16-year-old girl named Grace Harper, sharp-eyed, graceful, and too bright for her station. She'd taken the job to help support her mother and 2 younger siblings. She cleaned, ran errands, and served hors d'oeuvres she couldn't pronounce to people who never made eye contact with her, but one man noticed her: Jeremiah Crawford. At 28, he was already a rising force within the family business. Handsome, charismatic, used to being obeyed. He was also bored, and Grace was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She didn't flirt. She didn't chase. She read poetry on her breaks and talked back just enough to intrigue him. "I saw you reading Neruda," he said once, stepping beside her at the staff corridor. "Do you understand it?" Grace didn't even look up. "Do you?" He smiled. "Touché." That was how it began. What followed wasn't love. Not really. It was power wearing the costume of affection. Jeremiah was magnetic, yes. And Grace, so young, mistook that magnetism for safety. He gave her attention, books, nights under the stars, promises he didn't mean. And then, one late August evening, he took everything from her. When Grace realized she was pregnant, she was terrified. She went to Eleanor first, shaking and crying. Eleanor had always been the most approachable among the Crawfords. "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered. "I didn't know who else to tell." Eleanor had held her for a long time before she finally spoke. "This family. We clean up our messes, Grace. That's how we survive." By the next morning, legal arrangements were already underway. Grace was told to keep quiet, for her own good. She was promised support, a stipend, safety. And when baby Lila was born, Eleanor arranged for Grace's cousin, Frank Wright, to raise the child in exchange for monthly payments. No press, no lawsuits, no scandal, silence in exchange for survival. Grace didn't fight it. She was still just a girl, traumatized and alone. And she believed them when they said staying quiet was what was best. But as years passed, the guilt began to eat at her. She never stopped writing letters to Lila, ones she never sent. She followed her daughter's life from afar, praying she was safe, loved. She wasn't. Back to the present. Lila sat in her office at the Grace Foundation, reading one of those unsent letters Nancy had recovered from a storage unit. "My sweet Lila, they told me to stay quiet, that it would protect you. But silence isn't protection. It's a prison. I hope one day you'll understand. I didn't leave you. They took you from me. Love." Mom tears slid down Lila's face. But she didn't cry like she once did. This wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. She folded the letter, placed it inside, a locket with a photo of Grace, and pinned it to her blouse. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom, uncertain. "Ms. Crawford, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Veronica." Lila froze. She hadn't heard that name in almost a year. Not since Veronica Crawford, her former stepmother, stood beside Malcolm the night he covered up a death, before she turned on him to save herself. "Send her up," Lila said after a long pause. Moments later, the glass elevator opened and Veronica stepped into the office. Gone were the designer dresses and sharp stilettos. Her makeup was minimal, her clothing simple. She looked smaller, less polished, less dangerous, more human. "I didn't think you'd see me," Veronica said. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve to ask," Lila replied flatly. Veronica nodded. "I deserve that." Lila folded her arms. "Why are you here?" Veronica hesitated. "Because I owe you the truth. The part Malcolm never let me tell. The part I never had the courage to admit." Lila didn't blink. "I'm listening." Veronica sat on the edge of the guest chair, her hands clasped tightly. "Jeremiah wasn't a monster," she began quietly. "He did something terrible, yes. He abused his power. But the years after that, he changed." Lila arched an eyebrow. "How would you know?" "I was there," Veronica said. "When he was dying, when the cancer took over, he was a different man. Guilt-ridden, quiet, desperate to fix what he'd broken. He tried to fix it by leaving me in the hands of a predator," Lila said coldly. "No," Veronica said firmly. "He wanted you to live with Eleanor. She was his choice. But Malcolm blocked it, said Eleanor was too old-fashioned, too loyal to your mother. So Jeremiah, sick and dying, begged Malcolm to promise he'd raise you with dignity." Lila's heart pounded. "And Malcolm lied." "Worse," Veronica whispered. "He forged a new will after Jeremiah died. Burned the original copy. I helped him notarize it. I didn't know what I was signing until later." Lila stared at her, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a stone. "I wanted to believe we were protecting the family legacy," Veronica continued. "But really, We were protecting Malcolm's ambition. She reached into her purse and placed a USB drive on Lila's desk. It's the original security footage from the night Frank died, the one Malcolm had deleted. But I made a backup. Lila's eyes widened. Why? Because I knew he'd turn on me eventually, and I wanted proof that I wasn't the one who pushed Frank, that Malcolm grabbed him first, that the fall wasn't an accident. Lila stared at the small silver drive. It was the final piece, the missing evidence. So what now? Veronica asked, softly. That depends, Lila said, eyes never leaving the drive. Do you want forgiveness or immunity? Veronica gave a bitter smile. I already have immunity. What I want now is peace. Lila nodded once. Then give a full deposition. Help me clear every record. Help me finish what Jeremiah was too scared to do. Veronica stood. You'll never trust me. No, Lila said. But I can use you. And for the first time, Veronica didn't flinch. She just nodded and left. The recording began with a flicker of static, then came into focus. Frank Wright, swaying slightly, voice raised, eyes blazing. You think you can bury everything, Malcolm? He shouted, arms flailing as he pointed at Malcolm Crawford across the study. You think because you've got money, no one's going to find out what your brother did? Veronica's voice off screen. Frank, don't! And then the moment. Malcolm lunging forward, grabbing Frank by the collar. The two struggled. The edge of the marble desk flashed into view, then a sickening crack. Frank's head hit the stone. He collapsed out of frame. Silence. Veronica. Oh my God, he's not moving. Malcolm's voice, cold, controlled. We can fix this. No one saw anything. We say he left. The video cut to black. Lila sat in the conference room of Seattle's district attorney's office, across from Olivia Reyes, two federal prosecutors, and a pair of journalists from the Seattle Times. The USB drive lay on the table like a live grenade. You realize, Olivia said carefully, once we release this, there's no putting the truth back in the box. I'm counting on it, Lila replied. She slid a second folder across the table. Inside, affidavits from Eleanor Crawford McBride, Nancy Thorne, Veronica Crawford, and even former employees who had remained silent for years. One document caught a prosecutor's attention. What's this? Jeremiah's handwritten confession, Lila said. Never submitted, but notarized. It names Grace Harper and explicitly states I was his daughter, and that he left everything to me. It also details the manipulation he knew Malcolm would attempt. And the company shares? Another lawyer asked. Already transferred, Olivia said. Malcolm's proxy authority has been revoked. The estate is now officially under Lila's name. All 25%. The journalist looked stunned. You're going to release this publicly? I'm not just releasing it, Lila said. I'm calling a press conference. That weekend, the Grace Foundation auditorium was packed with media. Lila stood at the podium, wearing a black suit with a silver pin that had belonged to her mother. Behind her stood Eleanor, Nancy, Olivia, Elena, and Veronica, each a witness to different parts of the long cover-up. The backdrop was simple. A photo of Grace Harper as a young woman. Below it, the words, "The truth belongs to the silence you." Tried to bury. Lila stepped to the microphone. A year ago, I was just a girl from the countryside. A nobody. A forgotten name on a forged paper. But today, I stand here as the rightful heir to the legacy my mother was denied. And the truth my father was too afraid to protect. My name is Lila Harper Crawford, and I am not a secret anymore. Gasps. Camera flashes. The room fell completely silent. My story is not just mine. It belongs to every girl who was told to stay quiet. Every survivor who was buried under shame. I was stolen, lied to, nearly institutionalized and nearly erased. But I survived. And I will make sure no one else has to claw their way out of silence the way I did. She paused. To those who tried to silence me, this is your legacy. Now, a truth too loud to ignore. The farmhouse was smaller than Lila remembered. Time had stripped it of even the faintest charm. The porch sagged, the windows were dusted with grime, and the barn's roof looked like it would cave with the next storm. Still, it stood, just as it had through every silent year of her childhood. She stepped out of the rental car and walked. Slowly up the dirt path, Nancy beside her, Elena behind, holding a box of fresh flowers. "Are you sure about this?" Nancy asked softly. "I need to see it," Lila whispered. "One last time." They moved through the creaking front door. The air smelled of rust and dry wood. Her feet carried her up the crooked staircase to the attic room, the one where she'd once cried herself to sleep, wondering why no one wanted her. The mattress was still there, thin, unmade. The floorboard she'd once hidden her mother's locket beneath was loose. She pressed her heel into it and felt it lift with a familiar give. "This is where I became who I am," she murmured. "Not out of love, but out of survival." She placed a small bouquet on the windowsill. Daisies, her mother's favorite. Outside, they walked the edge of the fields. The crops were gone. Nothing remained but brittle stalks and cracked soil. "Frank's body was found at the edge of Malcolm's estate," Elena said quietly. "But this is where his part of the story started." Lila nodded. "He wasn't a good man," she said, "but he knew the truth. And he paid for it." They stood for a moment in silence. Then Lila bent and planted a single wildflower seed into the ground near the fence post, one she'd carried from the garden her foundation was building for survivors back in Seattle. She covered it gently with dirt. "New things grow," she said. "Even here." That evening, back in Seattle, Olivia sent her a link to a live stream. Malcolm Crawford's trial had begun. Federal court, maximum press coverage. The charges: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and negligent manslaughter. Veronica's testimony had broken headlines. Nancy's records had substantiated it all, and Eleanor's years of surveillance, her carefully archived emails, phone recordings, and legal statements had painted the final picture of a man whose empire was built on silence, forged papers, and a dead girl's ruined life. But none of it mattered as much as Lila's voice, because when she took the stand, she didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like someone who had inherited her mother's strength and her father's accountability. She told the court everything. And when the trial ended, the judge's sentence was clear: 5 years in federal prison. No parole. The building stood in the heart of downtown Seattle, its facade gleaming with hope. Above the main entrance, a bronze plaque read, "The Grace Harper Memorial Center, a place for girls who refuse to be silenced." Inside, light poured through the glass ceiling onto polished stone floors. The walls were lined with framed photos of young women holding diplomas, smiling with new babies, starting careers, stepping into freedom. Lila walked through the hall with Nancy, Olivia, and Elena at her side. This was more than a center. It was a sanctuary, offering housing, legal aid, therapy, and scholarships to girls who had faced abuse, abandonment, or betrayal. Every inch of it breathed with the legacy of a woman who had once been told she had no voice. Now that voice was everywhere. In the auditorium, hundreds had gathered for the dedication ceremony. Lila stood at the podium once again, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with calm, steady clarity. My mother was silenced. They told her to be quiet, to disappear, but she didn't. She left behind a daughter who refused to be erased. And now that daughter is standing here for her, for every girl who's been told to shrink, to hide, to stay small. We're not small. We are the future. Applause thundered. Tears flowed. Nancy hugged her tightly as she stepped off the stage. She would be so proud of you, Lila. I think, Lila said, smiling gently. She's finally at peace. That night, back at the modest seaside house she now called home, Lila curled up on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea. The moon shimmered over the sound. The wind hummed through the trees. Inside, a photo of her and Grace, restored from a torn corner of an old keepsake, sat beside a candle. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. Veronica had left Seattle, quietly and permanently. Eleanor had stepped down from her remaining corporate roles, spending her days mentoring young women entrepreneurs. Olivia had been nominated for a national award for justice advocacy. And Lila? She'd become what no one expected. A CEO with a conscience, a survivor with power, a woman built from ashes and truth. She ran a business, a foundation, a movement. But more than that, she carried her mother's name with pride. Not buried, not whispered, spoken boldly, like a promise. Grace Harper lives on. In the daughter they tried to silence. In the legacy they tried to erase. And in the world that now hears her name with honor.